He opened the trunk, and the smell of old paper and dust hit his nose. Inside, among yellowed photographs and rusted trinkets, it lay. A small leather-bound diary. The binding was cracked with age, and the lock crumbled to dust at a single touch. He opened it to a random page. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was legible. And the very first sentence made his heart stop. He will go up to the attic in search of old things, though in reality, he will be looking for something without knowing what. He will be drawn to the old trunk by the window. He looked around. Everything matched. He sat down on the floor, feeling a chill run down his spine. He turned the page to the very beginning. The date, 1923. What would you do if you discovered a chronicle of your life, written a century before you were born? Would you run, burn the book, or, giving in to a morbid curiosity, would you continue reading, risking the discovery of knowledge not meant for the living? Our hero chose the latter. This story is not fiction. It is a descent into a paradox that questions the very concept of time and destiny. And as we flip through the pages of this impossible diary with him, I'll ask you to do one thing to help our channel break out of the shadows. Subscribe and hit the bell icon. That way, you won't miss the finale of this investigation and will help us create even more intricate stories. And now, let's return to the dusty attic. His name was Ethan, an ordinary web designer who had recently moved into an old house inherited from a distant relative he barely knew. The house was sturdy but neglected. Ethan decided to start cleaning in the attic, and that's where he found it. The diary. The author didn't name himself, but from the first pages, it was clear he wasn't writing about himself. He was writing about someone who would live in this house 100 years later. He was writing about Ethan. Today, he will decide to clean out the attic. He will put on an old gray hoodie and jeans. For lunch, he will eat yesterday's pizza, cold, straight from the box. Ethan froze. He looked down at his clothes, a gray hoodie, old jeans. His stomach rumbled unpleasantly at the memory of the cold pizza he had eaten an hour ago. It was eerie. Not just a coincidence, but a precise, detailed description. He continued reading. The diary described his first days in the house, how he unsuccessfully tried to fix the leaking faucet in the kitchen, how he watched an old movie he found on the shelf in the living room in the evening, how he tripped on a floorboard on the second step of the stairs. It had all happened, every little detail. Ethan's mind, accustomed to logic and order, refused to accept what was happening. Was this a prank? A hidden camera? An elaborate hoax set up by his friends? He checked the house for bugs, for cameras, nothing. He had barely told his friends about the move. Who could have done this? And more importantly, why? Then an idea struck him. He would conduct an experiment. He opened the diary to the next not-yet-lived date. The entry read, "Tomorrow morning, he will decide to defy what is written. Instead of his usual oatmeal, he will make himself coffee and toast with jam. But the jar of jam will slip from his hands and shatter. The shards will cut his finger. In the end, he will eat oatmeal anyway." Ethan smirked. That was it. He simply wouldn't eat the jam. He wouldn't even take the jar out. The next morning, he woke up with a clear plan. He brewed coffee, put bread in the toaster. His hand instinctively reached for the refrigerator, for the jam. "No!" he said aloud to himself. He slammed the door shut, but at that moment, his cat, usually calm, leapt onto the kitchen counter, catching a jar of olives with its paw. The jar flew to the floor and smashed. Cursing, Ethan began to pick up the shards, and of course, he cut his finger. Blood welled up on his skin. Annoyed and hungry, he glanced at the clock. No time for cooking now. He poured oatmeal into a bowl and added hot water. The diary was right again. The panic began to morph into an obsession. Ethan had to understand who wrote this diary. He scoured every archive he could find online and in the local library about the history of his house. The house was built in 1910 by the family of an industrialist named Blackwood. The head of the family had a son named Julian, who, according to records, was a strange and withdrawn man. He was fascinated by physics, astronomy, and, as old newspapers put it, quote, esoteric theories on the nature of time, unquote. He found a photograph of Julian, a young man with a piercing, intense gaze, as if he saw something inaccessible to others. In 1925, Julian Blackwood vanished without a trace. The police never found him. The last person who saw him said he constantly muttered about a tear in the fabric of time and about being stuck in an echo of the future. Could he have written this diary? A man who had somehow managed to peer 100 years into the future? Ethan returned to the diary. He searched for any clues about the author's identity, and he found one. On one of the last pages, beneath the entry about how Ethan would find this very page, was written, "I see him as clearly as I see my own reflection. But I cannot touch him, cannot warn him. I am merely an observer. My curse is to see through his eyes, to feel with his hands, but to live in my own time. I am trapped in his future, which for me is the past." Reading the diary became a daily ritual for Ethan, a mixture of terror and anticipation. He would learn what he was going to do, what he was going to feel. On one hand, it was convenient. The diary advised him to check the wiring in the wall before it caught fire. It warned him about a visit from a tax inspector, allowing him to prepare all the documents. But this superpower had a dark side. One day he read, "In the evening, an old friend he hasn't seen in 10 years will call him. The friend will ask to borrow a large sum of money for his mother's surgery. He will refuse, lying that he has no money, and he will be tormented by shame." Ethan was horrified. He didn't want to be that kind of person. He thought about it all day. In the evening, the phone rang. It was the friend, and he did ask for money. Ethan's heart pounded. He looked at the diary lying on the table. "No," he whispered. He could change this. "Yes, of course I'll help." He said into the phone, feeling a huge sense of relief. But the next day, the friend called back. He said the money was no longer needed as a charity foundation had been found to cover all the costs. Everything had resolved as if Ethan had never intervened. The outcome remained the same. His friend got the help, but not from him. The diary didn't describe actions. It described the final result, the outcome of events, which was inevitable. Free will was an illusion. Delving deeper into the history of the house and the Blackwood family, Ethan found another hiding spot. In the wall behind an old bookshelf, a metal box was hidden. Inside lay a bundle of letters and a single photograph. The photo showed Julian Blackwood, and next to him, an incredibly beautiful woman. Her face seemed vaguely familiar to Ethan. He began to read the letters. It was the correspondence between Julian and this woman, whose name was Anna. They were madly in love, but their families were against their union. In his letters, Julian wrote not only of love, he wrote about his experiments. He believed that time was non-linear, that the past, present, and future existed simultaneously. He was building a device in the basement of the house, a chronograph, which, in his words, was supposed to allow him to see the echo of the future. In his final letter to Anna, he wrote, "My dearest, I am almost finished. Tonight, I will activate the machine. I will look 100 years ahead. I want to see if the world will be a better place. I want to see if the people of the future will remember us. I will find a way to leave them a message. I will find..." The letter cut off. It was his last one. Ethan looked at Anna's photograph again, and then it hit him. He rushed to an old family album he had brought with him. He found a photograph of his great-grandmother in her youth. It was her, Anna. His great-grandmother had been Julian Blackwood's fiancée. Everything fell into place. Why had he been the one to find the diary? Why did Julian see his life specifically? Because they were connected, not by blood, but through the woman whom one had loved and who had become the ancestor of the other. Perhaps Julian's device had somehow tuned into the genetic line of his beloved. He wasn't just seeing a random person from the future, he was seeing the descendant of his Anna living in his house. This realization brought no comfort, only more questions. If Julian disappeared in 1925, before he and Anna could marry and have children, then how did Ethan even come to exist? Anna, having lost her love, eventually married another man, Ethan's great-grandfather. This meant that Julian's very disappearance was a necessary condition for Ethan's birth. If he had stayed, Ethan would never have existed. It was a monstrous temporal paradox. Julian, by looking into the future, had created it. Through his observation, he fixed Ethan's life, turning it into a script. But every script eventually ends. Perhaps free will is not the ability to choose your own path, but the courage to turn to a blank page and start writing your own story without knowing what the next line holds. Ethan's story is not over. It is just beginning. And perhaps that is what his ghostly chronicler from the past was trying to tell him. That the most interesting part of life is the one that has not yet been written.